Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Licensing Committee. My name is Councillor Paul Ray, and I will be chairing today's meeting. Could I remind everyone that today's meeting is being live streamed onto the Council's website so that the public can observe the meeting without the need to be present. Now, before I do invite members to introduce themselves, there is a slight special occasion I do have to note today, and it's a certain person's last licensing committee. Who possibly could that be? Now, John here, for those of you who don't know, is retiring after 47 years, is it, at the council?
45.
45. Okay, I've added two more years on that. Not to make anyone feel old. When you started the council, I still had another 9 years to be born. That's all I'm saying. Nicely put. And I've been told a little bit of a tidbit that apparently on the day that you joined the council, a certain Elvis Presley passed away. And so one king passed and another king of public service joined us. So I'd like to ask all the members here today to give a round of applause to an absolutely fantastic length of public service. And I'm sure his memoirs of all the stuff he's heard in all the years he's been here will be published soon. So moving on, could I now invite the members and officers to introduce themselves and mute their microphone once you have done so? So I will start with Rob.
Good morning. My name is Robert Brown. I'm a solicitor in Leeds City Council's Legal Services and the advisor to the chair today.
Morning, Councillor Jess Lennox from Crossgates and Winmore, member of the Licensing Committee.
Good morning, John Illingworth from Kirkstall Ward, as member of the Licensing Committee.
Good morning, Councillor Lisa Martin from Roundhay Ward, also a member of the Licensing Committee.
Good morning, Councillor James Gibson, Crossgates and Winmore Ward.
Councillor Gore, Almus, Beeston, Holbeck Ward, new to the committee. Good morning.
Susan Duckworth from Entertainment Licensing.
Nicola Raper, Entertainment Licensing.
John Mulcahy, Chief Officer Elections and Regulatory. Both licensing sections fall under my remit.
Good morning, I'm Graham Berwick, I'm Service Development Officer with Taxi Licensing.
Morning everybody, Andrew White, Taxi and Private Hire Licensing Manager.
Morning, Kevin Chilito, Team Leader, Legal Services.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Paul Alderson, member of the Licensing Committee, Guiseley Road and Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Neil Buckley, Old Woodley Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Linda Richards from Wetherby Ward.
Morning, Billy Flynn, Councillor for Adler Wharfdale Ward, also member of the Licensing Committee.
Good morning, John Grieve, Governance Services, and I'll be clerking today's meeting.
And we are just waiting for Councillor Garthwaite to join us, who is her taxi's not turned up basically, so she's on her way. So moving to item agenda number 1.
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under agenda item 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of the press or public. Agenda item 3, I am unaware of any late items of business. Agenda item 4, could I ask members to declare any interests they may have? I'll assume that's none. Agenda item 5, apologies for absence. Yes, Chair, we have received a number. Councillor Biffle, Councillor Hutchinson and Councillor Smart have all sent their apologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Item agenda number 6, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 14th of December 2022. Do members accept these minutes to be a true and correct record? I'll assume correct unless otherwise indicated. No indications, so we'll assume those as correct. Item number 7, matters arising from the minutes. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? I'll give it a couple of seconds. Andrew, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just a clarification on page 6 of the minutes from last time, where there was a question around vehicles having an age extension inspection at age 7 or 8 years. It's for 2 different categories of vehicles. Those vehicles that are allowed to work until they are 12 years old, Hackney carriage wheelchair accessible vehicles, they are inspected at 8 years. All other vehicles inspected at 7 years. So we've kept the wording, but we've provided clarification in the single licensing policy.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Any other matters arising from the minutes of the last meeting? If there's no other indicators, Alex, I'll take that as fine then. No other indications. Item agenda number 8, the annual licensing report. Could I invite Nicola and Sue to present the entertainment licensing element of the report, and then ask Andrew to speak on the taxi and private hire licensing section? So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. As members will be aware, each year we bring to you an annual report of the activities that have been undertaken by entertainment licensing and taxi and private hire licensing. I won't labour too long on this because you've all had the papers in advance, but our biggest issue again this last year has been the coronavirus pandemic and what that has done to our hospitality industry. On page 5, we go through what we're doing regarding business support. So this is around putting out regular bulletins to the trade on the latest COVID regulations and restrictions, and again, when things open back up again. Again, we have all our staff working from home in entertainment licensing, and although we do now have some office space, that's how it's predominantly going to stay for the foreseeable future. With regards to license processing and the number of license applications, as you'll see on page 8, the number of new and variation applications stayed relatively stable. So it shows a good deal of optimism within the industry. But you will see the impact of coronavirus on our temporary event notices on page 9. We do normally do about 1,500 a year, and over the last 2 years that has dramatically dropped. However, from January this year, I can say that it's come back in force, so that's good news. I think I'm just about there, really. The other thing to point out would be on page 15, you've got our COVID-related actions. As you can see, it was quite a high number in 2020, and that's dropped right down in 2021. I'm happy to take questions at the end. So over to Andrew.
Thank you, Sue. I'm similarly going to give you a very brief highlights and then invite questions. We've covered an awful lot of ground in this year's annual licensing report. I'm going to point several areas for your attention, particularly because I think you'll be interested in them. I think you may have questions. The numbers I'm going to use are the numbers of the pages in the annual licensing report, not in the bundle. So the taxi and private hire licensing section starts on page 19 of the report. And it starts with an overview really of the year. Exactly as Sue said, it's been a challenging year. We've provided a good deal of support to the Hackney carriage and private hire trade, both financially, but also over the phone and by email. We haven't been able to provide anything like as much support face to face. That will change over the next month or so. Our challenge will be to keep answering the phone and the email at the same time as providing more services face to face. Similarly, we've coped with lockdown restrictions, isolation guidance as well. I would say in terms of taxi and private hire licensing, it's been around 50% of the staff have worked from the building. For some staff, they can't do their role unless they're working in the building. So for some officers, they can work in a hybrid way, but for a certain percentage of the taxi and private hire licensing team, they actually have to do their work in our building. In terms of the support to the trade that I'd mentioned and members who were here in January 2020.
Sorry, Andrew, just because everyone's not picking up, can you speak directly into the mic rather than to me? I appreciate you doing it to me, but it's just so everyone can pick it up. Sorry.
Yeah. So support to the trade. During 2021, we've administered something like £3.3 million of support to taxi and private hire license holders. It's slightly it doesn't quite fit with the calendar year, it fits more with the financial year. So around 1.3 million, that may rise to up to 1.8 million by the end of February figures for free licensing grants to owners of approximately 2,200 vehicles. These are low emission but also wheelchair accessible and larger vehicles. We've also administered almost 2 million. That will rise to up to, we think, 2.2, 2.3 million as of the end of March of additional restrictions grant. This is money that the funding that the council got from central government for COVID restrictions. So we've actually linked those licensing grants to 3-year packages of support that fit with 3-year licenses for drivers and 3 years worth of fees for owners of vehicles. So it's a significant amount of work administering something like 7,000 packages of support. Free licensing grant funding for vehicles comes from money that the council held back from the returning clean air zone funding. I'm going to move on then to page 20. Page 20, I just really want to emphasize the statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards. Again, we had a report earlier in the year. This set out about 30 areas of what's regarded as good practice or best practice. The council matches up very, very well against these standards. There are 3 areas that we identified that we wanted to pick up on in future reviews. The first of which was the single licensing policy, which summarises the existing council policies, and that was approved in December and published in January. Okay, the next one again is on page 20. Again, we've got the fall in the number of vehicles, but a growth in the number of hybrid vehicles. That growth is continuing, even though we've actually had a fall in the number of vehicles that have been licensed overall. On page 21, just want to emphasize vehicle inspections. So we inspected in our garage 2,700 vehicles, of which 53 failed one way or another. So people you may have received constituency contact about a high number of vehicle fails. That averages around about 4 a month, between 4 and 5 a month. It's not a high number of vehicle failures. Okay, turning to on street, page 22. Around 1,100 roadside inspections. In a full year of enforcement, I would expect that figure to be over 2,000. Quite a small number of vehicles then suspended immediately. So 60 vehicles were suspended immediately, and some of them may well have had to be transported on a vehicle transporter. Again, so you've got the majority, 980 out of those 1,100 found to be in really good condition. So it provides some confidence that when vehicles are inspected on the street, they're in good condition. Quite a low number of vehicles inspected on behalf of other authorities. We haven't done as many joint operations with neighbouring authorities. We've got 2 in the next fortnight, so those numbers will pick up during 2022. Okay, turning to the number of licensing statistics, page 23, significant fall in Hackney carriage and private hire drivers and also private hire vehicles. I think this is people who have and vehicles which have reached the end of their life and have not been replaced. We've also got, in addition, a further 600 drivers who, while they're licensed, have told us they're not currently working as a taxi or a private hire driver. That's a significant loss of capacity for the city, and we want very much to resume full driver training and assessment and to get those numbers up, but we'll also want to make sure that those people are fit and proper and suitable to be licensed. Okay, I'm going to go on to page 24 and 25 just on the decisions. So we've had fewer driver revocations or suspensions. So compared to previous years, it hasn't been, as Sue says, it hasn't been a normal year in terms of some of the licensing decisions. So 63 drivers suspended during that time. Normally those figures would be at least double that. So it suggests to me that there's been fewer journeys, fewer drivers. We actually haven't had fewer complaints, but there might be fewer other issues that are being generated there. And then just in terms of refusal and revocation decisions particularly, we've had a rise in major motoring offences from 3 in 2020 to 7 in 2021. And I've just provided a bit more information on page 25. So 7 revocations in 2021 were for major motoring offences, 3 for driving over the legal limit for drugs or alcohol, 4 for driving without due care and attention, 1 for driving whilst using a mobile phone. It looks like that's more than 7. So one of them may well be more than one issue at the same time. In terms of suspensions, we've got fewer drivers suspended than in previous years. I can't see a major change in the profile of what those reasons for suspensions are. Turning to page 26, which is around complaints, we're actually back up to pre-COVID levels, really. 794, very close to 2019, 828. One of the things that stands out there is license breach and driver conduct as well. So I'm sure you might have some more questions around that. License breach will be things like not wearing a badge, not having the light on any vehicle, for private hire vehicles parking on a taxi rank, and so on. And then the last two items, and then I'll open it up to questions or following Sue. So in terms of appeals, people have the right to appeal against a refusal to grant or refusal to renew, or against a revocation. We had 4 in 2021. This is on page 27. They were all either dismissed by the magistrates, the appeal by the license holder, or withdrawn by the license holder, often quite late, often on the same day of the hearing. So maybe a slightly lower number than we had pre-COVID. So we had something like 13 in 2019, but that's not an atypical number. You'll also note they're all at almost all at Kirklees Magistrates Court as well. So it just takes a bit more organising to be ready for those appeals. And then finally, in the year ahead, and this fits in with what we said at the December meeting, we've got the forward plan, which is to conclude the report on the consultation around suitability minor motoring convictions, but also start a vehicle conditions review, which when we've had the trade meetings was very much the focus from the trade in terms of what we're looking forward. Okay, I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Andrew. So I'm going to take the questions in 2 segments. We'll do entertainment licensing first, and then we'll go on to taxi and private hire separately. So are there any questions in relation to entertainment licensing first? Councillor Almas.
Thank you, Chair. My question is around the uncategorized complaints, because obviously if you're looking at the figures from 2019-20, from 2 and 3, it's jumped up to 14. So I'd like to know what they constituted in terms of uncategorized complaints, please.
Sorry, is that for taxi and private hire? Sorry.
No, it's
oh, yes,
right,
that,
that place. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure. I can find out and let you know.
Sure, so we will get a response out to members. Yep, Councillor Flynn, not Flynn, I'm having one of those days. Forgive me. Butley, there we go. I need coffee, clearly.
Thank you, Chair. I had 4 questions, please. And the first one referred to page 19. And on the second paragraph down, the text refers to subcommittee meetings resumed face-to-face in May 2021 to the disappointment of members. It didn't disappoint me, and nobody asked me whether I was disappointed, because in my opinion, it was essential that we got back to face-to-face meetings whenever we could, for all the reasons about being able to look at people, body language, actually see a human being. And I would like it minuting, Chair, with your permission, that I personally cannot associate myself with that paragraph.
I think we can perhaps minute that and maybe slightly reword that most members were happy, but there were some concerns that some members preferred face-to-face. I think we can draft that in a way to make sure your comments are heard. I think, is that a report page 19 or booklet 19?
Yes, it's the main page 7 or stroke 19. The second question, if I can, just relates to something which might be attached to that, is that we've had a bit of email rat-a-tat in the last few days about people, members volunteering for subcommittees or not volunteering. And I don't want to get involved in all that. But one thing that did strike me, maybe several weeks ago actually, was that it was just my impression that whereas we used to have very regular subcommittees, A, B, C, etc., I got the impression that we were now having fewer of those and a lot more ad hoc meetings where members were having to be recruited. And it was only my impression. I just wondered whether Sue could comment on that. Sue mentioned staff working from home, particularly during the pandemic. And I just wanted to ask the question as to whether somebody will have a policy on this, and is the department confident that the right number of people are available to actually do the job? And final point, Chair, if I can, on page 31, right at the bottom, there's reference to restrictions on gatherings and social distancing have caused the process to be difficult. Patience remains the catchphrase. Well, there are no restrictions on gatherings now. So can we get, we don't need patience, we need action, please. Thank you.
Sue, Nicola, if you want to pick those up.
I'll just address the first two matters to start with. About the licensing subcommittees, I'd have to hand over to our governance colleagues who arrange the subcommittee scheduling.
So every year we schedule possibly 40 meetings, and they're all diarised in members' diaries. If an application comes in which requires an urgent decision, then we have an additional meeting. What we're tending to find is quite a lot of the scheduled meetings, the applicants withdraw their application. So no subcommittee takes place. So you're right, not as many scheduled meetings seem to take place. And on the other hand, we are having a few more additional meetings which require an urgent decision.
Thank you, John. On the matter of home working for staff or hybrid working as we're doing, we're not saying that staff will be we will be predominantly working from home because it's proven it's very successful in our case, because we no longer hold those face-to-face meetings. We don't have a public counter any longer. We're more and more moving to electronic services. And we're finding that we are much more productive being able to work from home, cutting out the commute, etc., etc. We do have office space, as Sue has mentioned, but we no longer have the office that we used to have at Enterprise House that accommodated everybody. Now we have a designated space here in the Civic Hall. On average, 6 people can attend on any day, and there's 18 of us in the service. So, of course, we do have to manage that. So really, we're leaving it up. Obviously there's attendance on days we have committee meetings, or if we do happen to have a customer coming in and we're required to meet them at Merrion House, we'll arrange our working arrangements around those meetings. But in the main, everybody seems to be quite content working from home.
And just on the final point Councillor Buckley raised about the gatherings now that the restrictions have gone.
That I believe is under Andrew's section.
Yeah.
We'll pick that back up when we do your questions, so that's okay, Andrew. Cheers. Any other questions in relation to entertainment license from colleagues? So, okay, so going on to questions for taxi and private hire. Any questions for taxi and private hire? Councillor Almas?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. First one is page 22 and page 34. For some reason, we've got two page numbers there. On page 22, I can see there were 60 vehicles were suspended at the roadside immediately after the inspection. 82 were issued with rectification notices and 46 drivers were given advice about the vehicle condition. Now, out of the 82 with rectification notices and 46 drivers given advice, how many of them were later suspended? I'd like to know, A. Secondly, going on to page 24, looking at the inappropriate behavior, I'm glad that it's really come down, but in 2020 it was quite high. I'd like to know how well defined inappropriate behavior is in terms of decision making. And thirdly, if we look at 2021, again, reasons for suspensions, we had, again, going back to inappropriate behavior, 16 in 2019, 5 in 20, and 6 in 2021. So it's quite a high number. And finally, driver's behavior or driver conduct is one of the highest complaints when it comes to complaints on page 26. How many people actually appealed against those complaints once you received the complaints, and how many were actually upheld? Thank you.
And could you also pick up Councillor Buckley's final question as well when you respond to that, because I forgot about Councillor Buckley's question.
Okay, so starting with page 19, I think that should be, this is a report on the calendar year 2021. So it probably should say patience remained the catchphrase. We had significant disruption for the majority of the year. We had, similar to entertainment licensing, we had staff covering other staff's work, other staff's role. We had staff whose job it is not normally to answer the phone, but to answer the phone and so on. So that disruption was throughout the year. Not quite the same as entertainment licensing. We, as I've said before, we have around half our staff actually find it very, very difficult to do their role unless they're in the building. That includes the customer-facing staff in licensing, enforcement officers, vehicle examiners. There are other roles where people can actually work a hybrid pattern. So absolutely, we're taking action on that. What I don't want to do is to leave the phone calls and emails unanswered. And as ever, it's a bit of a battle in terms of how you prioritise. So that, if we're revising it for a final report, that should be in the past tense rather than currently, given that we're in March 2022. Councillor Ramos, I don't know the details of the vehicles that were inspected. How many of those then led to a suspension following an on-street request? No. Yeah. No, normally I would say if someone is given a rectification notice on street, they're given a certain amount of time to get that problem rectified. That could be a week or it could be 4 weeks. If they don't get that problem rectified, then the vehicle is suspended. So I can get the figures in terms of the number of vehicles that were then suspended following an on street. I don't know quite how that's going to match up, but I would expect maybe a third of those vehicles to have been suspended. But usually the majority of owners find that they go and get a new tire, or they go and get a new brake a bulb, or they go if the stickers have come off, they put the stickers on, and so on. So I'll get the figures in terms of from 2021 in terms of how many vehicles were then suspended. It may not be possible to absolutely match all of that up with all of the on-street inspections. Inappropriate behaviour, how well defined? It is very definitely a catch-all around that, and it certainly would. It's really poor behaviour that isn't then doesn't fit in with another area. So if that's about and it's not a million miles away from a driver conduct in the complaint side, for a very serious complaint that would touch on sexual behaviour, violence, drugs, theft. I would say theft rather than dishonesty. That justifies an immediate suspension. We regard then that there's a serious question mark about that driver's behaviour. For what we might regard as less serious offences, rudeness, careless language, or that sort of thing. So that it's certainly the sort of thing that we cover in our driver training around that sort of behaviour. We have a sort of professional driving standards module where we talk about the way we want drivers to talk to their passengers. And again, the vast majority of drivers absolutely do, and they absolutely understand it. One of the remedies that we would do for that driver behaviour would be to have some remedial training to make sure that those drivers are reminded of the standards that we hold them to. In terms of driver behaviour, and it's almost always the largest area. Driver conduct, it's almost always the largest area of complaints. That could be rudeness, it could be refused to turn the radio off, it could be didn't pick me up from the place that I wanted to. I haven't got the figures on exactly how many of those complaints are upheld. It's a slightly different procedure to the council's complaints procedure. We do find that some complaints absolutely are not upheld. So, for example, if it's a private hire vehicle, the location pickup is discussed with the telephonist at the operator, or if it's on an app, it's on the app with the operator. And we do find sometimes that private hire operators accept pickups at locations that drivers are very wise not to pick up. So you could have an unfair complaint against a driver saying, "Oh, I want to be picked up here," and the driver picked me up at 50 yards down the road. Driver's quite right to do that, to not pick up at a dangerous junction. So I haven't got the figures on exactly how many of those complaints were upheld. I would say probably the majority of those complaints are upheld, and we have some agreed action in form of a warning or maybe further training. But it's broadly understood to be lower level, so something that doesn't meet the threshold for an immediate suspension, or something that we think puts the public at risk.
I mean, surely, since it's a major chunk in terms of the complaints, I certainly would have expected to know or have that kind of figure as to how many complaints were actually upheld, because it does affect the drivers, when it comes to the driver conduct. And you said majority of them complaints maybe or might have been upheld. So I would like to have a figure on that, please, if possible. Thank you.
Yeah, we can ask Andrew. I'm sure that the figures are there. I just don't think Andrew has them to hand now, so I'm sure we can get that around members.
No, I'm happy to.
Yeah.
We've actually got a bespoke complaints system, so I know that there is that information in there. In terms of that, it's just that we don't provide it in the report. I think we're dealing with quite large numbers. We've got 800, of which over a quarter are driver conduct there. I think I'll find out exactly how many were upheld, how many were not upheld, and particularly then it's really about the action going forward as well, in terms of the remedy.
Is that okay, Councillor Emma? So just to confirm, we do have the information. It's just that it's not. We'll get it in a format that lets you to have that look down.
Yeah, my only concern was because it really affects people's livelihood. So it would be important for us to know how many were upheld. Thank you.
No, completely agree. And I think, as Andrew has said, these are the ones that wouldn't result in suspension. But I think for that clarity and trust and transparency, that's a reasonable point to ask. Any other questions for Councillor Downs?
Oh, I've got a card. It's all right. Yeah, apologies for being late. I had an appointment prior to the meeting, which is why I haven't got a card in place. Right, two questions. One is that on the licence breach, it's gone up substantially, and you said there are a number of reasons. I think given that it's gone up substantially, it would be useful to have a breakdown to understand where these licences are being breached. Is there one or two particular areas, and is it something that we can then highlight to the trade to try and address those areas, because it is a substantial increase? So that's question number one. Question number two. When we look at the licensing statistics, and in all forms of drivers and operators, the numbers are reducing. Now, partly I suspect this could be due to the pandemic, but when you also hear that more than 650 hackney carriage and private hire drivers have reported that they're not working, my concern is that are we in a position where we don't have the requirement for the taxi drivers and hackney, the trade, or is it that there is now a shortfall that we're not able to address, or is it that shortfall is being filled by drivers from outside of the area? Are we seeing a lot more drivers coming in? And I really think that if our numbers are dropping and other authorities' numbers are increasing, we have less and less control over that, which means that passengers in Leeds potentially have a lower level of service or control over their service. And it's something that perhaps we need to address to find out why would appear to be hemorrhaging numbers. Is it that there's no demand, or is it because also it will affect the council's income from this as well, which may affect your department's ability to function as well. So there's a whole host of questions around that. And it may even be, Chair, that if this does continue, or we pick this up now, that it might be something that we want to look at in depth, because I think that is concerning.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I mean, I think in terms of licence breach, there are definitely some areas that we knew were risks due to the different working arrangements under lockdown. So, for example, we issued stickers and we've posted badges for drivers that they wear around their neck, and we've posted the disc that goes in the front of the vehicle. We didn't take the old badge off people. We didn't take the old sticker off people. What we found is people driving around with an old badge for an operator they no longer work for. Our question would be, who is using your new badge? So that's something where we resume face-to-face. We will take the old badge off someone before we give them a new badge. So there's definitely some areas that we thought would be risks or concerns, but the risk would be even more so if we didn't post out the badges. To give an idea, we've probably posted out something like 10,000 badges in 2021. I guarantee not all 10,000 of those will have been cut up and put in the bin. People will have either retained them somewhere, particularly if they're changing from one private operator to another. So I would say question marks around stickers, around badges, around that. Who are you working for? Why are you not using an up-to-date badge? I would very much expect those to be the largest 2 or 3 categories, but there are some basic ones like private hire vehicles parking on taxi ranks. And again, there may well be other sort of, if you like, regard as lower level issues that don't necessarily put the public at risk, but might well cause friction within and across the trades. It's the sort of thing that we could drill down and just remind back out to people to say, well, actually, did you know these things are going on? And there's a role there for everybody in terms of making sure that you've got the up-to-date badge. We do go to great efforts to post out those badges and discs so that they can be put in the car and so that they can be worn and so on. But during lockdown and lockdown restrictions, we've not been in a position to make sure that we've got the old badges and stickers. We have got an honesty box where people can leave them with us, but that's not the same as making sure there's not a duplicate badges going on. In terms of licensing statistics, I mean, I think in terms of the vehicle side, the vehicle figures are picking up extremely quickly. So we're inspecting something like 50 to 70 vehicles that are applying for a new vehicle license. That's rather higher than would have been the position before lockdown. So for me, I think we've had a suppressed demand during lockdown, the loss of earnings as well. If you remember, the taxi and private hire trade haven't been able to work as many miles, haven't been able to earn as much money, probably have not been able to replace vehicles, may not have been able to maintain some vehicles as well. For 6 months in 2020, we actually allowed people just to send an MOT certificate in without the vehicle being inspected, which possibly led to higher level of vehicle failures in 2021. In terms of the driver side, we've got around 300 people who have said they are either applying to want to work as a private hire or a Hackney carriage driver, or they've given us a notification of interest to do that. And I think our approach this week and next week is to say, thank you very much for that. We'll have some training, we'll have a training fee from you, we'll have an application fee from you in terms of the income you said, and we will then start to resume that new applicant, new driver training. In terms of the people who've kept a license in their back pocket and may return to it from other work, we think that might be delivery work or it might be split elsewhere. I think taxi and private hire drivers have always combined work with other work, and I think I'll be interested to see whether it was still 600 midway through the year, and that would then tell us that those people are very definitely keeping that license in reserve, but really not adding to the capacity in the city. One of our main areas of worry there is around unfulfilled journeys where people have made a booking and the vehicle just has not turned up, and particularly the pattern of complaints that we haven't really seen around disability complaint, but they have gone from 10 to 16, is on page 26. would be around people with guide dogs or wheelchairs, actually, who absolutely rely on those vehicles to get around, to get home. If they feel that vehicle doesn't turn up, and if whether there's a vehicle cause for that or a driver cause for that, those are complaints that we take very, very seriously then, and we certainly discuss with the operator, and we may well discuss as well with the individual drivers as why they weren't able to fulfill that journey. So for us, particularly, that driver capacity is relevant. We still want to make sure people are fit and proper. The vehicle numbers are very definitely coming back up, Councillor. The drivers, I think, it's a bit slower, but we have a plan to get through the driver training and assessment faster in 2022.
Yeah, thanks. Just to come back to that then. So your take on the figures dropping are primarily due to what's been happening with COVID, etc., and you're confident that the numbers are starting to rebuild and will rebuild, or do you think it's something that we should be looking at to ensure that the numbers don't drop off? And if there is a loss of trade within Leeds-based drivers, that it's not being picked up elsewhere, because that would lead to a potential reduction in the control that we have over the passengers' experience within Leeds.
Yeah, reasonably confident. I think every time I go in Leeds, I see an out-of-town private hire vehicle, but now I'm looking for it all the time. So that's probably unconscious bias on my point of view. I couldn't say that I've seen any more vehicles. Absolutely, we want to resume, and I'm confident that we're picking up on the vehicle side. The driver side will be slower. I'd like, by the time maybe we have the mid-year June, just to provide an update on the numbers there. I'd be interested in how many of those 600 drivers have come back to taxi or private hire work. That's far higher actually than the 300 odd that have left the trade, and also those are experienced drivers as well. They don't need to be trained in that way, they just need to be licensed. So that will be something, we could do that quite quickly in terms of that. If we think the attraction of delivery work is something that trumps taxi and private hire work and so on, then we might need to think again in terms of how we, where we get our drivers from, and how operators recruit them, how taxi associations recruit them.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to help reassure members as well, just to help put this into some sort of context, the reduction in drivers is not just solely attributable to Leeds. It's also something that's affected other authorities across the country as well. There was some media coverage about it last year. The BBC provided quite a lot of media coverage about it, where it reported that some local authorities had seen a drop as high as 50% in the number of their licensed drivers not returning to the trade following the pandemic. Fortunately, in Leeds, we haven't seen figures quite that high. Also, the Department of Transport produces statistical information for taxi and private hire vehicles in England, and that report suggests that the number of licensed drivers in England fell on average in each authority by an average of 15.9% during 2020 and 2021, which largely corresponds to the drop of drivers we've seen in Leeds as well. So we're comparable with that figure. So the issue is a national one and not just confined to Leeds. As Andrew's already said, our priority is looking at those 600 applications that are coming through to be processed to get more drivers on the streets in Leeds, and also to prioritise the new vehicle inspections as well, which are rising as well. But I just thought it would be helpful to mention that. And of course, I can provide a link to the media coverage and the Department for Transport report to John after the meeting to circulate to members, if that would be helpful.
Yes, please. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chair. Take my mask off. We've heard a lot about the over the past 6-7 months or so, since I first came on the licensing committee, about the stat guidance. What is it? The 2020 stat guidance, specifically with regard to how our responsibility is to keep the public safe. I wondered whether or not that stat guidance includes responsibilities and the council and the licensing department to support those working within the trade to ensure that they're safe as well. You've touched on some of the things that you've been doing in terms of providing screens and some of this sort of introductory training as well, which seems to sort of support taxi drivers to be aware of people that might be violent and aggressive. But I wondered what the stat guidance says about keeping people working in the trade safe, whether we're compliant about that, and to go further than that, what else we're doing to ensure that people working in this really vital industry are safe and free from abuse.
I'm going to let Andrew answer on the factual bit, which is what's actually in the statutory guidance, which is fair to say is not a lot, but I'll let him answer that in detail. And then I'll come on to what Councillor Cooper's already pledged to do in terms of driver safety afterwards, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I think the statutory guidance contained 30 sections. Not one of them is entitled Keeping Drivers Safe. I think there are two areas that are specifically relevant. One is around that engagement, consultation, communication with stakeholders, but also trade groups as well. And we match up very well to the statutory guidance, even though it has been a challenge with sort of reduced opportunities for face-to-face meetings. I would say in the last 3 months, we've had more face-to-face meetings around taxi and private hire issues, probably the majority of council services around that, sometimes in a very constructive way, other times it's been quite a difficult discussion. I think the area that probably is most relevant and most important going forward is around CCTV in vehicles particularly. I'm not sure that there's a lot in the statutory guidance around safety screens and adaptations to vehicles, but there's 3 pages in the statutory guidance around CCTV, and very much if we hadn't had lockdown, the next policy improvement we would have done would have been to consult on a revised updated CCTV. And I think it's one of those areas where passengers want it, drivers want it, operators want it, and I think the council as the licensing authority wants it as well. The challenging part is how you fund it, and also particularly how you get the data from the cameras, and that's the tricky discussion with information management around how you do it. So there's not a great deal. I'll go back to the statutory guidance, councillor, and just pull out the relevant sections. It doesn't mention a lot on specifically about license holder safety. But that's something that we can deal with that. We don't have to necessarily change our approach to the statutory guidance, but that might be something that we'd take steps elsewhere, Chair.
Thank you for that. And I think this is a genuine problem. I think the trade has raised this, that they are dealing with people who are sometimes incredibly drunk, can be violent, can be aggressive, can be abusive, can be, bearing in mind the demographic of the trade, sometimes, let's be blunt, racist towards the people that are actually taking them home. Councillor Cooper has already committed to the trade in the meetings that we've been having the trade to use her position as the executive board member who also covers public safety and work with partners in Safe for Leeds and the police to look at how we address this, because there is an issue. The drivers are under risk. Let's not pretend that they're not. But the government's guidance is completely, utterly, totally 100% focused on the passenger. And that guidance has only got tougher between 2010 and 2020. For those of you who have invested yourself in the wonders of statutory guidance from the government, you look at the 2010 best practice guidance, it was much more, if you will, balanced is probably a word to have it around different challenges. The 2020 guidance is very much, it's all about the passenger, pretty much nothing else. You do not consider anything else. As a city that we are, we want to obviously stick to our legal duties, but we also have to reflect on the fact that these people are doing dangerous jobs. They're dealing with people that, it's the reason why the bus companies don't work to that time of night, because they don't want to deal with them, particularly if they're inebriated, etc. So there is a commitment from Councillor Cooper already to really look at how we can use the other partnerships we have with the council and the other parts of the council's infrastructure to really look at how we move forward on driver safety. And I please correct me if I'm wrong from the trade members out here. I think that's a commitment long overdue, and that's something we do really, really want to work on. They are a vital part of our city's nighttime economy in particular, and they are dealing with some people that some of us would not like to deal with during the day if they were that inebriated. So it's very much on the agenda. Any other questions for Andrew or comments? Is it a follow-up or is it a new one? Can I bring in Councillor Flynn first because he hasn't had a chance to speak? So Councillor Flynn.
Okay, just a question first, Paul, then we'll come back to comments. Okay. On page 34, Andrew, roadside inspections enforcement, only 3% of the 1,200 vehicles that were inspected were licensed by other authorities. And I suspect there's a lot more than 3% of cross-border traffic into Leeds. I wonder why so few foreign vehicles are being checked compared to our own, particularly as the requirements they have in terms of driver and vehicle conditions are not as stringent as ours.
Yeah, I was disappointed with the figures that we've recorded. I think to factor in there, a lot of the operations where we would check out of town vehicles as well are conducted in partnership with other agencies. So if these vehicles were also checked by the police or also checked by VOSA and elsewhere, we won't record those inspections. So that we've got a joint operation this Friday and a week on Friday, and we may well check 50 vehicles each day those days, but we will only report on our system the vehicles that our officers inspect, and that may well be that the police or other agencies have first call on those vehicles. I would be wanting that to be nearer 400 or 500 vehicles per year rather than 34 out of town vehicles. Yeah, 34. So for us particularly, we would certainly want to do at least one operation every month to get those figures higher, to make sure that we're clear. To be very clear, the majority of those actions in amber, rectification notices advised about the vehicle condition, they are actions for that licensing authority. So we would then be talking to the neighbouring authority, and that would go in their licensing system as their own action. So absolutely, I absolutely agree in terms of that. We want to have a higher number, approximately double roadside vehicle inspections. We want to have much higher, maybe up to 10 times as high in terms of the out of town vehicles inspected during 2022.
The question, Andrew, was why have we done so many enforcement actions, or so few rather, enforcement actions on out of town vehicles?
Well, we haven't been enforcing 5 nights a week. We've had other duties for enforcement officers to do as part of the overall licensing approach. I mentioned about things like badge printing and so on. Enforcement officers have been printing badges. Enforcement officers have been answering phone calls. So to some degree, the enforcement capacity has been about 50%, 60% compared to what would be the position in a normal year. That's not the case now. So those enforcement officers now are fully occupied on enforcement activities. And then linked to that, we've had far fewer joint operations. I think the first joint operation we did in 2021 was in July in York. So again, that would include our officers helping York and other authorities to look at their vehicles. But again, if that is picked up by the police, not by our officers are busy on a joint operation, but that may well not be logged by us as our vehicle that we've inspected.
I think that the point Councillor Flynn is maybe getting to is maybe we need to get that data so that we actually understand if there's other partners doing this and we're not collating that data, it makes it look like we're not doing this, particularly for the trade as well, for them to have confidence that those enforcement agreements that we have cross borders is actually being looked at. So is there a way of speaking with our partners to see if we can claw some of that data back, or at least put it in place for future so that we have a proper broad understanding of what they're picking up, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. And I think, again, 2021 was a very disrupted year. We are absolutely planning now more frequent joint operations, and to get that summary of, it is difficult because we've got a spreadsheet where we just look at the vehicles that our officers inspect. So it would be relevant for us to get that report back from other agencies. We certainly don't want to double count those vehicles as well. We don't want to give the impression that we're inspecting twice as many. But yeah.
No, I just think it would give confidence for everyone that actually out-of-town vehicles are being inspected as part of the harmonisation agreement that was put in place. And I'm seeing the trade nodding their head there quite positively towards that. So I take it that's something we probably need to look at. Any other question? Oh, Councillor Almas, you had a question, sorry, didn't you?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to make a comment. millions of journeys are made every year, and I'd like to put that on record. Obviously, any complaint is a complaint too many, but 794 out of the millions of passengers that are served by the taxi drivers and the trade in the city. And I'm sure all of us have used it, and our loved ones and people particularly who are vulnerable are in their hands, and they take them to safety. I would like to thank the trade for doing a wonderful job that they're doing as well, because it's a very thankless job, and they're putting their lives at risks. And I think I cannot personally thank them enough. Once my mother was very ill, and the way she was taken care of, I cannot thank them enough for that. Thank you.
No, and I think your comments are appreciated, Councillor Amos. I think there's always going to be, we're a regulator, and there's always going to be natural tension, but I think sometimes it's lost in the duty of the regulator, sometimes lost in translation. Let's be frank, 99.999% of drivers on the road are doing the right thing. They're decent people, they're working hard, they're doing a difficult job. And I suppose from a regulator's perspective, we always probably sometimes focus too heavily on when things go wrong. But I think you're right to say when there are millions of journeys being taken, I think it's just over 6,000 licensed or maybe slightly less than that people in the city. You actually look at the statistics of the suspensions, the revocations, we're talking about an absolute tidgy minority. And I think, we have a tendency in this to always focus on the negative. I think sometimes we do need to actually talk about the positive, which is they're doing an incredibly difficult, hard job that some people don't want to do in difficult circumstances. And most of them are good eggs, and they're just out there earning an income for their family. So I think the comments are appreciated. I'm sure the trade appreciates those comments as well. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you very much for those comments. It's very much appreciated.
It's very much appreciated. There we go. I like cheers that, Mike. Straight away. Better than heckling. I like that. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Flint.
Thanks again, Paul. First one is just a typo, I think, on page 39. The paragraph that's the year ahead. It begins within 2021, which I think should be 2022. At the beginning of the report, I'll paraphrase it. It talks about this report as a testament to how licensing has kept the trade moving during COVID. And I think I would like to ask their views on that before we actually commit ourselves to it. I think I'd like to comment on what's not in the report rather than what's in it. There's no mention of what is currently probably the worst relationship between officers and the trade, certainly in my years on licensing. We've had any number of demonstrations outside the Civic Hall, in the Civic Hall, in the Council Chamber and at Torry Road, dating back a couple of years and certainly spilling over into the current year. I know that Debbie and Paul are doing their absolute best to improve the situation and the relationship between the trade and officers and the council for that matter, but I suspect it's going to be a very long uphill battle. The comment on communications, if my texts, telephone calls and emails from the trade are anything to go by, the dissatisfaction is huge. I mean, it's rarely a day or two goes past without I get a message of one sort or another, and sometimes a number on the same day, all of it's reflecting a lack of confidence in VLE, a lack of confidence in the way in which they're dealt with and the courtesy in which they're dealt with, even allowing for the worst effects of COVID, which I'll agree, certainly we've all been under a huge amount of pressure, and officers no less. But we are talking about, as Paul has already mentioned, an absolutely essential part of the nighttime economy here in Leeds. There's a brief mention of the convictions policy, which is now, I think, into its third year of discussion. Second set of consultation should have been discussed, I think, at the executive board 2 months ago, and has been put back. And I see it's on the forward work programme for May. That's assuming the analysis of the responses is acceptable this time. I think that really should have been in. There's no mention of the interminable harmonisation group, which I think is now into its 6th year. And I suspect the furore over the convictions policy will pale into insignificance when the discussions eventually move on to vehicle conditions. No mention of potential safeguarding risks posed by mainly the app element of the private hire trade. Tens of thousands of bookings are being returned. That means they've been accepted by a driver and then refused to pick up, but no one has bothered to tell the customer waiting on the side of the road, probably because they've identified a more lucrative fare. Apart from breaching the contract between the customer and the operator, this means that many vulnerable fares, men, women and children, are being left at the roadside without any protection whatsoever. I don't think I need to emphasise the inherent safeguarding dangers in this practice. And I know that's been discussed at licensing recently. I think I brought it to the attention of Debbie some months ago. And in my view, the report is a data set. It's not an annual report, and it ignores the current dissatisfaction of the trade with officers. Thanks, Paul.
So I'm going to take a few of those because I think that they're perhaps more political points than there are for officers. So
not political. There's nothing political.
Oh no, but in terms, it's
okay.
I get the point you made. Sorry, perhaps political is the wrong word. I think it's fair to say there have been lots of conversations and there has been tension. There's no point in pretending there hasn't been. I look at where we were 10 months ago to where we are now. I look at 10 months ago when I first became the chair and I was getting not just 1, nor 2, nor 3, but 4 or 5 complaints about vehicle inspections every day. Even though it's not been completely finalised, since we've introduced a slightly new approach and simplified approach in Torry Road, I've had 1 in 4 weeks. I'm now getting more complaints about capacity, getting drivers in to get their vehicles inspected. We're now looking at actually how we do that. I had a conversation with one of the association chairs a couple of weeks ago about an idea about bringing in some of their MOT advisors to look at what the examiners look like so that they can do pre-checks, because it turns out 30 to 40% of the appointments that happen at Torry Road are people going basically have a pre-check to see what they need to do, then they get it fixed. That causes capacity issues for everyone. Councillor Cooper has found funds to begin the digitisation of the service, which will take away capacity issues. But yes, there's tension, and I think obviously you're referring to the suitability and convictions policy. We're arguing over a date now. We've agreed as a council that the schedule for the suitability policy to be reviewed is 2024. We're arguing over whether that should be done sooner or later now. And that's literally where we're pretty much arguing over a date. We certainly can't do it before we've finished the minor motoring convictions consultation. And just to be clear, the reason why that was delayed is we had an unprecedented volume of response. And actually, a lot of it didn't just touch on minor motoring convictions. It touched on other areas that drivers have concern with. And there's an actual genuine want to address those. So we have a list of concerns that drivers have given us in terms of the current suitability policy, which our legal team and our licensing team are now working through. So then the question becomes, if there is, and it's not my decision to make, if there is an earlier review of a pre-existing policy, it's which bit do we do? We do it now, or do we do it after we've had consultations with the drivers over the bits they've got concern with, over the minor motoring convictions? Because then we're talking about a slightly different policy to what actually exists at the moment, because we've made amendments to it. And I think we just need to reflect on that. There is no disagreement about reviewing this policy. We're just disagreeing on the date. And that's a very different position, I think, to 12 months ago, when there wasn't even really a conversation of reviewing the policy. It was a conversation of, let's just get it through the door. I am really looking forward, assuming I'm still in this position after May, to sit down with the trade and go through the stuff. We have concentrated, and I know there's been some frustration in the trade, and understandable frustration, but we've concentrated on what costs drivers money. We've concentrated on making sure we get our minor scuffs and bumps policy right, because I don't want drivers not being out on the road when there's nothing affecting public safety. We're looking at capacity. We're looking at the vehicle condition so that we can address the long-standing issues of tinted windows and boot capacity and vehicle standards and what type of vehicles we like. These are complicated. And yes, perhaps some of these should have been done over the pandemic, and we've maybe lost 2 years, but we're trying to get on with them now. And as much as there's a lot of heat over arguing over now what is a question of a date of a review, my main focus is public safety on the one hand, but doing so in a way which is fair and reasonable to the trade, so they are not having unreasonable expectations put upon them which are not directly related to public safety. That is Councillor Cooper's direction on this. We've had many conversations, and I'm sure officers will agree, around making sure that the focus is on finding solutions. And I'll give a prime example. A 6-seater van, there's an issue with it. Well, let's find a way of licensing it as a 4-seater van while we sort out the 2-seat issue. There are ways and means, and there's an approach. And yes, there are bad relations, but actually a lot of those can be fixed, and it's just going to take time. And, you know, there is no hiding from us in any way that there have been problems, but we are slowly getting through them, and we will continue conversations with the trade. I hope the trade feel they've had better relations in the last 10 months, that we are starting to work through things. Mike's nodding there, which I appreciate. Thank you, Mike. And I'll bring maybe Mike in a moment just to maybe say his piece. But we are getting places. It's perhaps just not as fast as people would like. And on that point, Mike, would you maybe, as a member of the trade, like to maybe say something to the committee about how you feel relations are? If you want to come up to the mic, if that's okay.
Right, thank you. There has been problems in the past. We've talked about an awful lot today with regards to things that have happened since COVID. COVID has caused everybody a lot of problems, including us, including licensing. We've had to adapt, we've had to manage. Andrew's touched on the position with drivers. My company, I'm struggling. I'm 50 drivers now to start with. So everybody is struggling with drivers. As John has said, it's prevalent throughout the whole country. It's very, very difficult to employ drivers that, as has been said, they've gone into other industries, which causes the whole trade a problem, not just our company, but all companies. The problem also being is that because there's not enough drivers, customers don't have enough vehicles. You're right what you say, some drivers do cherry pick, which means some customers are without a driver. That needs to be addressing pretty sharpish. I was going to touch on maybe we should be looking at the rate, what the driver earns on a fare, maybe a fare increase at some later stage, but that will take place as a suggestion when we talk to Hackney Carriage licensing department to look for a fare review. But as for the whole trade recently, there has been a very, very low point. But recently we've had good response from both Councillor Ray and Councillor Cooper. We are very concerned about the suitability policy. Don't just think because the suitability policy has been spoken about that the conviction policy is not thought about either, because they go together. The whole suitability policy, in our opinion, we think it's advisory, but you are aware of our opinion. We think that the previous convictions policy could be tailored or sorted out so it's similar to the current suitability policy with a bit of common sense. Our belief is that it's too vague. It could be misinterpreted at times. Andrew may go on to better things, and licensing officers may go on to better things. And you've got to consider the continuity of the policy when other people take over. Because if somebody pinches a bike at 16 years of age or something similar, you don't want that to affect why somebody doesn't get a license. So it needs something in it. But relations have definitely increased, got better since we've been talking about it. And I'm hoping in the future we can resolve the issues that we've got amicably so that we're all in a position of being agreeable. We don't want murderers and rapists in the trade. We want people to rely on good drivers to make sure that the customers are well looked after, and we want that to continue. But we don't want draconian rules. We think that's incorrect.
No, thank you for that. And yeah, I know there's this disagreement on the advisory bit, the joys of the due regard.
Yeah.
But no, I think it just to demonstrate to committee members, and actually to people watching this, because there will be people that pour over this video, that it's not all doom and gloom. There's a lot going on in the background, and actually we spent a lot of time focusing on what costs drivers money, because we don't actually suspend a lot of drivers. We don't actually revoke a lot of drivers. We still need to look at that. And I'm just going to mention two things that have been agreed as part of that as a stopgap before a full policy review in a moment, since it's been raised about the issues. But there is work going on to try and make drivers' lives easier. And I just want to reflect on some of the things we have agreed recently. There's some details still to be sorted out, but around minor bumps and scratches and that, well, we have now a real clear direction that we do not expect drivers to be taken off the road unless it's dangerous. As I've said, my complaints have disappeared over that pretty much overnight. We're now working on the capacity issue. We've agreed, haven't we, at meetings to look at the types of vehicles that will allow to be licensed. And Andrew's already committed to put some officer time aside to go down to the trade fairs. I've even agreed to go down and look at the trade fairs so that we can try and improve the standard of vehicles. We've agreed to do a full vehicle review. We've agreed actually, and I think it comes to the fundamental question of trust, to do a decision-making review, to look at our decision-making policy, because actually that's where a lot of this roots from. Should it be officers? Should it be councillors? Should it be a mixture of both? You know, so there is way to go, and you know, I think again it's fair to say we're more probably like say arguing over a date now rather than anything else, which is like say a different world than we were. I am not hiding from the fact that there are tensions. Councillor Cooper is not hiding from the fact there are tensions, but we have been laser focused on what costs drivers money. Now that we've got some of those temporary fixes in place, we are going to start to look at those issues drivers have raised around the policies and try and find ways forward, because the city needs the trade and the trade needs the city. They want to go out and earn an income. We want them to go out there and pick up people who are vulnerable in a way that actually some other, like the bus operators, won't. So again, just to echo Councillor Almas's point earlier, I think it's, you know, we should all thank the trade for the huge amount of work they do in difficult circumstances. We are ticking off bit by bit their issues. It ain't going to be a short haul. It's going to be a long haul in some cases, but the intention to get it done is there. And I'm looking forward, if I'm still sat here in May, as licensing chair, to be working with the trade and officers and this committee to actually do those reviews that will actually make a difference to drivers on a day-to-day basis. And the things that, yes, important that we guarantee public safety, but that we do so in a fair and reasonable way, which means we do what we need to do legally, but we don't inadvertently impact drivers unnecessarily. On that, are there any other questions and comments?
Can I just add?
Yes,
that,
sure.
Can I just add that I think it's been a wonderful thing that yourself and Councillor Cooper have done to introduce the working parties. I think it's imperative that, other than the trade meetings we have with Andrew and his team, I think those are usual every 3-4 months. They haven't happened as much because of COVID, but recently we started having the meetings. But I think the meetings that yourself and Councillor Cooper have introduced gives the trade a direct communication with councillors and yourself to put our issues forward. And I hope, even if hopefully you're still here in May, all of you, let's hope that that will continue, because working together, as you said, we can't do without the city and the city can't do without us. And the only way to really move forward is to continue the discussions with the council in regular working parties, so that if we feel as though it's going off track a little bit, we can sort of bring you back in line, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
And on that bombshell, any other questions or comments? Yeah, Councillor Flint.
The point I was making, Paul, was that it's not in the report, not the things where it's improving and all the rest of it. Okay.
No, fair enough, and I appreciate it. And perhaps maybe for future annual reports, we might need to maybe have a flavour of the feeling out there on stuff, actually. So we have a more rounded thing. It's not just the facts and figures, but actually what's the flavour, the mood music, shall we say. But I think everyone agrees we're in a different place to where we were 10 months ago. And long may that continue and improve. And speak to Councillor Lewis about keeping me in my job. And again, on that, everyone's laughing. And on that one, is there any other questions or comments before I close the meeting? Yeah, Andrew.
Right, can you push your button?
Sorry.
Yeah, just a very, very brief update on Councillor Flynn's mention of safeguarding, because I don't think every member of the committee will have read this. We had a report from Visu, and Visu are a national private hire operator, and they provided some quite concerning statistics around the pattern of drivers who are licensed with more than one operator cherry picking journeys. And there was one example, was a driver who'd refused 1,200 journeys around that. And again, it's interesting that it's linked to West Yorkshire and York harmonisation. 2 of our neighbouring authorities allow drivers to work for more than one operator. Leeds City Council doesn't. So those drivers could drive in Leeds, but they wouldn't be licensed by Leeds. So that concern around cherry picking or refusing journeys is very real out there, but it's not something that applies to Leeds licensed drivers, if that makes sense. But particularly in terms of safeguarding, and particularly and again back to the sort of grim focus on passengers and so on. We are directed to have a focus on passengers and vulnerable passengers, and exactly as Paul, the chair has said there, I'll focus on those passengers who, by their very nature, are likely to be vulnerable or at risk, or because they're in the nighttime economy, they're vulnerable or at risk at the end of the night when they want to go home. So we always want to have a focus on those as well. So we don't take safeguarding issues lightly. The number of very, very serious allegations against licence holders is very, very, very small. We're talking about a handful per year, maybe 20 or maybe 30 in terms of that. So just to echo that point, we know that the vast majority of licence holders are fit and proper, are safe and suitable, can be trusted to put your vulnerable, loved family member in their vehicle. I think we had a trade meeting where we said we might find it difficult to regulate taxi and private hire trade. Good job we don't have to regulate the passengers. That's a really challenging area. So just to sort of reassure you on the safeguarding side of things.
Just before I bring Councillor Flynn, who's got a point, I think the issue with the people cherry picking journeys is something we are acutely aware of and going to pick up on some of the policy reviews, because there was one person I think that refused 127% of the journeys they got. They spent, and I think they spent 3 or 4 hours a day refusing journeys to cherry pick the one that cost the most. So anyway, Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, just to be clear, Andrew, you said that it wasn't happening in Leeds. Were you talking about the 2 operator or 3 operator employment, or the returned journeys element of it?
Okay, to be very clear, we do know that we have got journeys that people are booking that are not being honoured. What we're not finding is evidence of a systematic pattern of people playing off one operator with another. So Leeds licensed drivers can only be licensed with one operator at a time. So you cannot have that position where you're licensed with both Uber and Visu, which was I think the example that we had. I think the driver was in South Wales, wasn't it? With the enormous percentage of these. This is national intelligence that gives us that information across dozens of authorities. I think Visu is licensed in 30 odd authorities, and Leeds is unusual in that it doesn't allow people to be licensed by more than one operator. In fact, that's come up in one of the trade meetings. The drivers want to be licensed by more than one operator, and in Leeds we've either historically resisted it, or we've thought that there were concerns around, well, who actually, how, you're more likely to have a booking cancelled. We absolutely do have a pattern of complaints in 2021 from people who said, I ordered a vehicle and it didn't turn up for one reason or another. And that's not necessarily a complaint against the driver. That's a complaint initially that comes against the operator, and that's the area that we absolutely need to find out more information about. But where that leaves vulnerable people at the curbside, absolutely, it's a safeguarding concern.
I'm going to bring Councillor Flynn to respond, and Councillor Almas, and I think you want to say something, Mike.
Yeah, just again for clarification, Andrew, the stats I've seen reflect more return journeys than journeys actually fulfilled. In other words, the journeys, there are more journeys being refused than actually being picked up in those VIVU statistics that you quoted a few minutes ago. Does it necessarily mean you have to work for 2 operators in order to cherry pick? Because surely if you're just working for one operator, you can cherry pick.
I think maybe to pick that up on the presentation we had is that people are doing it under the radar. So they're having multiple apps, and I think we raised our 72-hour rule for changing an operator, and then sometimes they're using our own existing policies, which was written, I think it was over 10 years ago. And actually, we're probably going to need to look at some of our own policies around actually how people can move between operators, what's happening under the surface. The operator condition review will look around things like that. There may need to be things in there around actually not just the operator honouring the booking, but maybe the drive. There's a whole series of things that actually, because some of the statistics are. To be fair, I had it yesterday myself. I booked a taxi, it cancelled, the surge kicked in, and I got the same driver. So it does that. It's happened to me. So we do know it's there. So Councillor Almas, and then if we're bringing Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick comment. I mean, living in the most CCTV country in the world, I think it would be a win-win situation for everybody. I'm not saying that it should be compulsory, but if we could incentivize as a council perspective, because obviously, the taxi trade is part of the nighttime economy and so on. If we could incentivize in some ways and help them, obviously the technology is getting cheaper every day as well and better in terms of installing CCTV cameras, because I'm sure that helps everybody, the passengers, the drivers, and it would help, the police and so on. So it would help everybody, all concerned. But we as a council, I think we have certain obligation in terms of proactively engaging with the trade industry and incentivizing some of that technology in future as well. Thank you.
I can safely say there's lots of work around that, because we see the value of it, particularly for a lot of those malicious complaints where we can literally look at the video and it's malicious, it's dealt with and it's done with. I think the issue, as Andrew's probably like, is not necessarily the camera technology now. It's the data storage and collection that we're trying to go, because there's some very strict rules from the Information Commissioner. And I think the systems we're looking at around that would cost drivers to be compliant about £500, because we haven't got to the market scale yet. But it's something very much, I think everyone agrees, would be beneficial for absolutely everyone, us from enforcement, prevent malicious complaints rolling on, the safety for the drivers. It's those issues. So I think you're pushing, that comment's pushing on an open door. It's just trying to get to where we need to get. Mike.
From a trade perspective, you need to know an issue that's arisen, which may have something to do with the refusal of certain drivers to do certain work. As Andrew said, you can only be in one company in this city. In other cities, that doesn't happen. You can be in various companies. The problem being is that a driver can log on to 2 separate or 3 separate apps and can cherry pick whichever job he particularly wants to carry out. That is a problem for the customer, but not necessarily for the driver, because at this moment in time, it's a driver's market. It's not a customer's market. And drivers can choose where they wish to work. We don't allow anybody other than our own company to work our own system. Now, you're going to have a problem if people come into Leeds and have got 2 apps, because they're going to cherry pick who they want. The other problem you've got is, since the Uber case where they lost the court ruling, a lot of operators are frightened to death to, shall we say, restrict drivers, particularly in private hire companies, to stop them doing this practice because of the situation where Uber lost the court case, because they were then classed as employed, because they can only get their employment from the app that Uber supplied. So therefore, they got their rights of holiday pay and sick pay, etc., etc. Our company, which is a solely Hackney Carriage company, was taken to court, and we are the only company in the country. We won the case, and it said that all Hackney Carriage drivers are not employed. They're classed as self-employed, because Hackney Carriage Taxi has the opportunity to work the app of the company it works with, and also has the opportunity to pick up off the station and also flag downs on the street. So he's got 3 separate choices of income. So therefore, Hackney Carriage is not restricted to those rules, but a private hire is. And a lot of operators are very, very insecure in stopping their drivers cherry picking because they could all suffer this overruling. So they're very reluctant to do anything about it. And that is a major problem we've got in this city.
I think it's fair to say that the worker status ruling is well acutely won by our legal team, because I think the second it came through, Paul Rob here got a load of emails from me.
Yeah.
So we are aware of it, and it's something that will be worked through, shall we say, as we go through the other policy reviews, which is one reason why we want to get the other policy reviews done, because we're a couple of years behind on everything we need to do. Hence the argument over a date over a particular other policy. Other than that, Councillor Martin.
Yeah, just one final point, and I've spoken to you before, Paul, about consistency of decision making, and that's something that drivers have written to me about in particular. And I welcome the changes in the treatment, for example, of the minor bodywork issues raised and the distinction between minor and major bodywork. But could you please explain how you're going to ensure the consistency of decision making around those definitions and reasonable time to get things fixed?
So I think it's one of the first things that's on the agenda of the new working group, just to figure out what a minor dent is, or a minor scratch, or a large one, and then that will obviously inform what Andrew says to his examination team in the garage about making sure that's consistent, so that can be KPI'd and managed properly. So it's literally one of the first points, and then we'll have the first working group meeting. To be fair to say, and I think Andrew would agree, officers have already taken it on board in terms of using reasonable judgment. And as I've said, my complaints have become non-existent for minor bodywork issues since we started these conversations probably about 6-7 weeks ago. They've completely dropped off a radar, but I think that consistency is an important thing. And this is why we want to work with the trade to find out what they feel is right, match it up to what we can and can't do in terms of making sure things are safe and consistent for the public, and then make sure that's really rooted in the examiner's mind. And I think on general decision making, you know, the stopgap we've put in about me seeing a confidential report every month about suspensions, revocations, to make sure that they are being consistent, that we're not seeing any unreasonable spikes, is a stopgap until we get to that much more substantive decision-making review, where we can have all the debate about what is the best way to make decisions on licensing and revocations and suspensions of the actual driver licenses. So there's a lot of work to go through in the new municipal year, and probably the municipal year after that, but we're very much on track. And I think we've agreed from a lot of the complaints we've had, making sure that consistency is there in how the examiners work, how the licensing officers work, how the enforcement officers work, because taxing private hire is not just the examiners of the garage. There's the enforcement officers, there's the licensing officers, making sure there's a real golden thread. And I know Andrew's also really keen with John to really work on the customer service side as well, to make sure there's actually a really customer service in terms of the driver, a really customer focused side towards the drivers. Again, the aim should be, unless it's for public safety reasons, how can we get people on the roads to earn an income, rather than finding reasons not to make them earn an income. Public safety will always be first. There is no debate. There is no question. We're required by statutory guidance and actually a moral duty to make sure things safe. But those consistency on those other things, so that we can get drivers back on the road, I think we all agree would make life easier for everyone. And on that, are there any other questions or comments? Okay, so after all of that, to the recommendation. Are members supportive of the report recommendation with the minor changes that have been raised? So can I take a vote on that? With the minor changes that have been agreed, are we supportive of the recommendation? All those in favour? All those against? Abstentions? That's carried unanimously. Work programme item agenda number 8. This is really for information purposes. You'll see in May, the first big item. Is it May or is it 8? Or is it one after? Yeah, May is the minor motoring convictions consultation results, and what recommendation we will make to the executive board on either that wording provision, or if there's any comments we want around the wording provision that goes to executive board for consideration. Jess?
Just, do we have a date for that meeting in May? Is it in the diary already? 27th.
It's the day after the annual.
I was going to say it might be that there's a change in membership by then, but if there is a change in membership by then, groups and whips should know about that in good time
Yeah,
before
yeah.
then. So maybe it's worth penciling in a briefing for new members, because obviously they'll have to have done their training before then. Maybe it's worth having a particular briefing about what we're reviewing at that time, because I'm sure there will be some consistency in members, but there will probably be some new members as well, or members who've been on parental leave this year who are returning, etc. So maybe it's worth, between the elections and the AGM and that licensing committee, having a particular briefing. I know, John, you're like, it's not my problem. But maybe it's just something to put a pin in and pick up when we get to May.
No, I think that's a real good shout, and I think I was speaking to Rob before the meeting started about just sitting down with officers just to double check the kind of initial training kind of stuff for when they start on license committee if there's changes. So John, or the replacement for John, will in due course issue that accordingly. Other than that, again, it says don't forget John, but I mentioned that earlier because I thought let's get it started in case the meeting goes on for ages. So date and time of the next meeting, maybe including a small kind of briefing session beforehand, but for the official next meeting is I've lost where I am. Friday the 27th of May 2022 at 10 a.m. in Leeds Civic Hall. And that concludes today's business. Thank you for your attendance, contribution. I declare the meeting closed. And again, a final round of applause for John and his retirement. There we go.
Thank you, everyone. Just before we depart, sorry to say this, we still require 2 members for the 15th of March. So if anybody's available, please let me know. I think we've got Councillor Buckley volunteered so far. So I'm still after another two candidates.
It's the one in my ward, unfortunately.
It's Crossgates ward, so